Today on Starfield Essentials, running Starfield on Linux in 2025. I've put all my tips and tricks in this video. Choosing a distro, kernel, GPU and drivers, overclocking, controller and headset, MangoHud, Steam installation, DLSS indicator, DLSS override, modding with creations, modding manually, and installing and running Starfield script extender. All items have chapter markers for easy navigation and links in the description for sourcing. My name is Richard. Let's get started. Choosing a distro. Choosing a distribution seems like a religious practice. If you're not running my distro, you are an infidel who must be converted. Now, I've personally run dozens of operating systems over the last 45 years. Yes, I am that old. So I think users should pick a distro that meets their needs, whatever those might be. I prefer distros based on Debian. I like the Debian approach and package system. I've used both Debian and Ubuntu for decades, but I decided to use Linux Mint for my gaming PC. I started with version 22 last year and upgraded to 22.1 in January. You may hear some people say you should run a rolling release, but I have not found any need for that. You may hear some people say you should run an immutable distro, but again, I have not run into any issues with a non-immutable distro like Linux Mint. What about so-called gaming distros? I have not found any real benefit to these, based on what I will show you in the following sections. I recommend a distro that has support for your hardware out of the box, and that has a strong user community if you need to ask questions. Use a distro that has an easy backup and restore feature for critical files. On Linux Mint, this is the Timeshift application. I take a snapshot with Timeshift before making any significant changes to my system, such as trying a new kernel or graphics driver. So, the TLDR, pick a distro that you like, and if it doesn't work out, switch to something else. Next, kernel. Once you get past choosing a distro, you will enter the second aspect of the Linux religious wars, the kernel version. There is a belief among some users that running the latest kernel is the ticket to better gaming performance. While newer kernels can provide minor improvements, and usually don't degrade performance, there's generally nothing magic about newer kernels. The most important element of any kernel is the degree to which it supports your hardware. If you are running cutting-edge hardware, you will likely need the latest kernel. AMD 90 series GPU owners are learning about this, but we'll get to that shortly. I've run Starfield and other games like Cyberpunk 2077 and a variety of demos and benchmarks on the 6.8 series kernel that is the default in Linux Mint 22.x. I've also upgraded to the 6.11 kernel. I've seen basically no difference in performance. Will I update to a newer kernel when it becomes available? Yes, I will do that when the built-in Linux Mint tools offer a newer version. I'm aware that there are ways to upgrade kernels in Linux Mint using methods short of compiling a new kernel yourself. And believe me, I've done that before. However, my general approach is to balance meeting requirements for gaming or other tasks versus the risk that I will break something in my system. For example, if I got a new piece of hardware that was not supported by my current kernel, then I might pursue a newer version using means that stray farther away from vanilla Linux Mint. I think that is a pun, but you know what I mean. I will not chase the possibility of a few extra frames per second if my system is otherwise performing well enough for me to meet my play goals. Next, GPU and drivers. Now we find ourselves in the third aspect of the Linux religious wars, choosing a GPU. It's not an accident that I have framed these first three choices as a trinity. For the truly religious, you should be running a rolling distro with the latest kernel and an AMD GPU. This will supposedly get you the very best performance from your Linux investment. That is possible, but for my purposes, it's a bit narrow-minded. For example, I don't just use my gaming PC for gaming. Because I have an Nvidia GPU, I'm also able to access a massive ecosystem for learning and using large language models on my own computer. There's far less argument concerning CPUs, which are either Intel or AMD. I personally have dozens of Intel PCs, but my gaming desktop runs AMD. The argument for an AMD GPU has traditionally been that AMD provides the code necessary for developers to include AMD drivers in the Linux kernel. Nvidia, on the other hand, relies on closed, proprietary drivers. This is slowly changing, but it is still largely accurate. There are pros and cons to each model. A con for the AMD approach is that current Linux software lacks support for all of the features of the latest AMD hardware. There are efforts to bring FSR4 support, for example, to Linux through reverse engineering. While this is impressive, keep in mind that Nvidia releases support for Linux immediately. A con for Nvidia hardware is that for games that use DirectX 12, which is most modern games, there is a sort of Nvidia performance tax. Nvidia users could see a reduction in frames per second of 0 to 20% or more. This is an officially tracked bug that Nvidia is working. I will link to the forum thread in the description. I've personally seen this because my gaming PC dual boots Windows 11 and Linux Mint, and I'm using an Nvidia 4070 Ti Super. In Starfield, I've seen hits of almost 40% in graphically intense areas of the game. For example, on Windows 11 24H2 with the 572 drivers, in Aquila City I was averaging about 100 FPS. In Linux Mint 22.1 with 570 drivers, in Aquila City I was averaging 63 FPS. Here's a comparison between the Monster Hunter Wilds demo on Windows and then Linux. Now, by default, Linux Mint tends to offer slightly older Linux drivers through the Driver Manager tool. I personally prefer using the drivers packaged and published by the Ubuntu graphics drivers team. Because they are packaged for Ubuntu, and Linux Mint is an Ubuntu derivative, they integrate seamlessly with Linux Mint. I don't recommend installing drivers directly from Nvidia. While it is possible to do that, I fall back on my preference for using integrated tools when possible. To enable the Graphics PPA from Ubuntu, run these commands in a terminal. As you can see, I'm running one of the 570 series graphics drivers now. At the time of recording, the current production branch release is 570.144, the current new feature branch release is 565.77, and the current beta release is 575.51.02. It's weird that the new feature branch has a lower number than the production branch. If anyone knows why, please leave a comment. Keeping with my standard of only chasing features if I need them, I tend to run production branches, although I have run beta releases in the past. While on the topic of GPUs and drivers, it's worth mentioning a fourth religious argument: windowing systems. For decades, X, also called X11, has been the standard for Unix and Unix-like systems such as Linux. Within the past decade, a modern alternative called Wayland has been gathering support, and we're on the verge of seeing some distros remove X from their installations. This is another aspect of Linux that has not made a big difference for me. By default, Linux Mint still uses X, and will probably still use it for the next year at least. If Wayland offers features that you need, then I recommend choosing a distro that supports it more aggressively. One final point on GPUs. You may encounter issues if you have both a discrete GPU, such as a board by Nvidia or AMD, and a CPU with an integrated GPU. For example, my AMD 7600X has an integrated GPU on the CPU. This did not cause any problems for me with other games like Cyberpunk 2077. However, in Starfield, I was not able to activate frame generation, a feature I use on Windows as well. Only when I disabled the integrated GPU in my motherboard BIOS was I able to enable frame generation in Starfield. Next, overclocking. How do you overclock your GPU in Linux? I use the excellent free LACT overclocking tool by Ilya Zlobintsev. He recently added support for Nvidia cards. I chose to install it via Flatpak because that version was newer than the alternatives. Here you can see I am overclocking the GPU core clock by a modest 90 MHz and the VRAM by 200 MHz. I use these same values on Windows. If you find your Starfield game crashing at odd spots and you overclock your GPU, the crashes might be caused by aggressive overclocking. I can use plus 200 and plus 400 for example in certain benchmarks, but Starfield is not stable when I overclock with those values. Next, controller and headset. Let's finish talking about hardware by mentioning a controller and headset. Neither are required, especially if you want to play using keyboard and mouse on PC. I learned to play Starfield on an Xbox Series S, so I am more comfortable using a controller. I also prefer to use a headset for audio. I do not use the Starfield themed controller and headset with my PC. I use this basic USB connected Xbox compatible controller and a Razer Blackshark V2 Pro Wireless Gaming 2023 edition headset, which uses a proprietary radio frequency dongle. I would prefer to have a wired headset as well, but the RF connection works great in Windows and Linux. The controller works perfectly too. Next, MangoHud. Before I get to installing Steam, let's talk about measuring game performance. I'm a big fan of getting metrics about the game. In Steam, you can enable a simple FPS counter, but that's not enough for me. On Linux, MangoHud is the best option that I have found for getting access to game performance statistics. MangoHud is really powerful and configurable, but it takes a little work to make it your own. MangoHud offers many options for installation, but I preferred installing it myself. For the case of version 0.8.1, which is the latest at the time of recording, that means downloading a file named MangoHud, as you can see on the screen. And note that when you extract the archive, it will do so in a directory simply named MangoHud. So if you have an older version, you might want to rename the old directory before extracting the new version. The MangoHud setup.sh script has options to uninstall and install, but personally I've only ever installed. It just writes over existing versions if they are there. On my system, once installed, the MangoHud binary is simply called MangoHud, and it lives in user bin. The heart of MangoHud is the MangoHud.conf file, which by default lives in your home directory, in the MangoHud directory under .config. This video is not a tutorial about creating a MangoHud.conf configuration file. If you need help, there's a tool called Goverlay, which you can use to create a MangoHud.conf file. MangoJuice is another option. I've used both, but once I got the hang of the configuration file, I just modified it myself. I found it easier to take a look at this list of options and just add them until I got the look I wanted. If anyone wants a couple sample configuration files, let me know in a comment. Currently, I'm using a configuration that puts all stats on a banner at the top of the screen, as seen in this video. I'll tell you how to activate MangoHud in the next section. Next, Steam installation. Starfield is available on Xbox for PC and on Steam. Only the Steam version works on Linux. On Linux, Steam provides a compatibility layer called Proton, which makes it possible for a game compiled for Windows to run on Linux. You buy Starfield on Steam like you would any other game, and tell it where to install. Because Starfield is compiled for Windows, make sure you have a compatibility option set. If you're already playing other Windows games on Linux, you'll already have this box checked. I've always played with the Proton experimental version and have not had any problems. Version 10 just arrived in Steam and it has been working for me. I recommend that you take a few actions to ensure you are in control of when Steam updates Starfield. If you let Steam update Starfield on its own, you may find that your mods are not compatible with the latest version of the game, and then you'll have to wait for your mods to be updated. In the game settings, select the Wait Until I Launch the Game option. You might also want to select the Schedule Auto Updates and restrict updates to between 2 times you will not be playing, like 3 AM and 4 AM. Or maybe you are playing during those times, I don't know, just pick some other time. The most foolproof way to prevent a Steam update from updating is to find its ACF file and change its permissions to remove write access. Starfield is game 1716740, which you can find by looking at the Steam page online. Steam stores Starfield game files in this directory. The tilde represents your home directory, like home RB in my case. Steam stores saves and configuration files in this directory, and in-game photos in this directory. To run Starfield, you can simply hit play here, and it should work. In the last section I talked about MangoHud, so let's enable that. In the Game Properties tab under General, there is a Launch Options section. If you add MangoHud equals 1 space %command% to this window, MangoHud will appear during the game. I often use a simple game like Timberman to test MangoHud configurations. Note that for games like Timberman, you'll have to use the syntax MangoHud space %command% to enable the overlay. In the case of Starfield, we're passing an environment variable. For Timberman, we're telling MangoHud itself to run the game. Incidentally, if you want Steam to limit frames for you, 2 options are available. Here I limit the frame rate to 141, which is what is recommended for my 144 MHz monitor. Use vkd3d_frame_rate equals 141 for DX12 games, or dxvk_frame_rate equals 141 for DX11 and older games. On Linux, I have MangoHud implement frame rate limiting, so I don't use this feature. Next, DLSS indicator. Buckle up, everyone. I love getting information about game performance, so if you're using a Nvidia card, this might interest you. If you want to know if deep learning super sampling or DLSS is active and how it's working, there are a few options. The easiest is to add the following to your Steam launch options for Starfield before the %command% entry. This will make a change to the sudo registry file on your system. To revert the change, use these settings. You can find the sudo registry file system.reg in this directory. You can even edit this file yourself if you want. Edit system.reg with a text editor. After the text you see on the screen, add the other text you see on the screen to enable the DLSS indicator. And to disable it, use the following. Personally, I just use the DLSS override, which we will discuss next. Next, DLSS override. Now let's talk about using a newer feature offered by Nvidia drivers. There are DLSS overrides to tell Starfield to use newer versions of DLSS, frame generation, and other features. Starfield ships with version 3.5 of nvngx_dlss.dll and nvngx_dlssg.dll. However, we can configure Steam to instruct the Nvidia drivers to override these files with the latest versions when Starfield loads. Use the following Steam launch command. This is all one line. I will link all this in the description, including the previous stuff in the earlier section. And I will link to 2 resources describing what all of this means. Note that I'm actually passing a few arguments that don't really matter, because Starfield doesn't support them. Starfield supports DLSS Super Resolution, which upscales from a lower resolution to a higher resolution, and frame generation, which adds an intermediate frame, at least on my 40 series card. Starfield does not support ray reconstruction. However, I use this single syntax because it's easier to just copy and paste the results for another game, like Cyberpunk 2077, that does support DLSS SR, FG, and RR. Now, it's possible to achieve similar effects with other methods. You can manually swap the DLL files. You can also control presets using tools like DLSS tweaks. I've linked to a Reddit post where I describe how to do this. I don't bother with these methods anymore because the override feature is so convenient. I don't have to add or change anything in the Starfield game folder or make any changes beyond the Steam launch command. Next, modding with creations. Thanks to the creation system in Starfield, there's a really easy way to bring mods to the game on Linux. In fact, on Linux, I prefer to use the creation system as much as possible. I have a character in Sage that I run on both Windows and Linux. They're not sharing a common directory. I just make sure both instances of the game have the same mods, or as close as possible. Most mods for Linux belong in this directory. Here's part of what mine looks like on Linux. 2 of the mods are ships I created myself using the creation kit. I will link to my tutorial in the video description. To use these extra mods, you must make sure they are enabled in the creations menu in-game. Looking through this load order, you will see several mods that are not native to creations. These are ESM files that I brought from my Windows and Nexus mods installation. As long as I enable them in the creations menu as shown, they will work in-game. So you can use mods from other sources, like Nexus mods, and manage them with the creation system in-game. I'd like to add a recommendation made by viewer TuneIn6844. They suggested that it's good practice to keep a backup of the plugins.txt file. This file is a record of the load order used by Starfield. If for some reason your load order unexpectedly changes, you can replace the plugins.txt with your backup. Just make sure it has the files you want. You can find your plugins.txt file in this directory. And it looks like this. Entries with an asterisk before them are enabled in-game. Next, modding manually. What about third-party mod managers? On Windows, I use Vortex to manage mods. This is another holy war, with Vortex users on one side, Mod Organizer 2 users on another, and more esoteric options watching the battle. I know some people have gotten Vortex and MO2 to work on Linux by running them using compatibility layers, but this is too much trouble for my needs. There is a Linux native mod manager called Limo, which I will link in the description. I tried it, and I thought it was easier to manage mods manually than to use Limo. Perhaps it will become easier in the future. Nexus Mods is working on a cross-platform mod manager called the Nexus Mods app. Currently it supports Stardew Valley and Cyberpunk 2077, with support for Bethesda titles in the works. For now, if you want to step outside the creation system, I recommend modding manually on Linux. If you're going to choose where to put mod files, I recommend using the archived or packed version of the mod. If you can, stay away from mods that rely on loose files. Here's an example of a mod that offers both, so it's easy to compare. It's a Destiny 2 Armor mod. The packed or archived version offers an ESM, a main file, and a textures file. This is really easy to keep track of, and you just put it in the data directory of your Starfield installation. The unpacked or loose version offers another ESM, but all the materials, textures, geometries, meshes, and so on are individual files. This is a lot more to track, and if another mod chooses to intermingle with or overwrite these files, then you have a problem. That is why I recommend using a mod manager whenever possible to manage these issues, especially when using loose file mods. However, if you avoid these and use packed or archived versions, you'll be much better off. And if you want to get access to the BA2 files, you can use a tool like Bethesda Archive Extractor to open the packs and see the contents. To use mods, you will probably need a Starfield custom.ini file saved in this directory, with these contents. And finally, installing and running Starfield script extender. Let's finish with something a little more complicated. Oh, that's what we need, right? What if you want to use the Starfield script extender on Linux? It's actually pretty easy to install. Oh, so it's not complicated at all. Download the latest version of the archive manually. Extract it somewhere. You only need 2 files in the archive, sfse_1_14_74.dll and sfse_loader.exe. And these are the latest versions as of today that match the version of Starfield. Copy these 2 files to your Starfield game directory as shown. Now, the magic happens when you add the following to your Steam launch options. Insert this text right before the %command%. Note, those are double dashes at the end. Before the game starts, you might see a small text window flash in the upper left corner of your screen. You know that SFSE has loaded when you see the text in the lower left side of the screen mention SFSE and its version. To disable SFSE, just remove that bash command from your Steam startup syntax, and remove those 2 files if you are so inclined. Thank you for watching this video on running Starfield on Linux in 2025, and thank you to all my subscribers. Please consider subscribing to show YouTube that you enjoy positive and honest Starfield content. Special thanks to all channel members. I hope you're enjoying our private Discord server. If you'd like to know more about membership, click the join button on the channel. There's no obligation. Anything you and YouTube gives me goes back to this channel, whether it's to buy hard drives for capturing footage or acquiring creations to review. What have you been doing in Starfield? Your insights make this channel a place for positive and honest discussion of the game. In addition to videos, I also post to the community tab for this channel on a daily basis. If you subscribe, you will see these posts in your YouTube feed. If you made it to this part of the video, please leave a comment with the word penguin. And yes, all of this video, the gameplay, editing, everything, was done on Linux. Also, remember to ring the bell icon and select all notifications. Check out my other videos, and please tell your friends about the channel. My name is Richard. I will see you in the Starfield.